For a long time, ADHD was considered to be a condition of childhood. It wasn't until 1994 when the DSM officially recognized that there was such a thing as adult ADHD. But those of us who were practicing back in the 1980s saw a common situation where we knew that there was something more than childhood involved. Typically, we would have an evaluation, we would talk to the parents and the child about their behavioral issues, we'd make the diagnosis of ADHD, and as we started to explain what this was about to the parents, one or the other of the parents would become uncharacteristically quiet, and then we would hear in a small voice, "You know, I think I have the same thing." And they would explain what was going on in their lives, and it was very clear that this had impacted them throughout their lifetime, throughout their childhood, and was having a major impact upon their adult function as well. In 1994, there was finally that official recognition that this was a condition that could impact adults, and this was a very important point, because from that point on, we were at a situation where we could now begin to do research into the question of, okay, if adults can have ADHD, does it look the same as it does in their kids, or does it look different? And the answer is, as you may have guessed, that there are going to be some differences. The biggest difference is that primary symptoms in adults with ADHD include a series of psychological functions known collectively as executive functions. And executive functions refer to those things that have to do with self-regulation, self-management, self-control. And all of those things we find are impacted in adults with ADHD to a point that can be and usually is impairing. What does this look like in real life? Well, it impacts issues of organization of space, organization of time. An example of organization of space might be, where are my car keys? I always put my car keys right here on this table. I don't see them here. Who took my car keys? Well, the reality is you don't always put them there. 3 times last month you left them in the car overnight, once with the engine running all night. Twice your wife fished them out of the washing machine because you forgot to take them out of your pants pocket. And remember that time when you couldn't find them for 3 days? They finally turned up in the vegetable bin in the refrigerator. You must have been holding them when you were unloading groceries. You don't always put them in the same place. You don't have that sense of clear spatial organization. Organization of time can be an issue, and this has to do with being punctual for appointments, for example. Being there on time, not 10 to 15 minutes late, and certainly not an hour early to make sure that, God forbid, you're not going to be late, but to have a sense of how much time it's going to take to get ready, to get to wherever you're going, and to do whatever you have to do. Those kinds of time organizations, people with ADHD have difficulty with. They may have difficulty with time-oriented functions, which might include having to do a sequence of things in a particular order in order to get them done efficiently. All of these things can be impacted, especially in adults with ADHD. There are difficulties with planning so that you take into account all of the different steps that have to be done to affect that plan, and take into account all of the difficult exigencies that may occur that you have to account for just in case. Let me give you a real-life example of this. A number of years ago, one of the major ADHD support groups was having a national conference, a 3-day national conference in Boston, Massachusetts. Now, it turns out that both my wife and I are professionally involved in ADHD, and we saw this conference going on. We figured this is a great opportunity. We have family in Boston. We'll go to the conference. It'll be tax deductible. We'll visit our family, take care of everything in one trip back east. This was a great plan. We signed on. About 3 weeks before the conference was about to begin, this 3-day national conference with speakers and participants from all over the country, 3 days before, we got this emergency email from the organizing committee that the site of the conference had been changed from Boston to Norfolk, Virginia. Turns out that with this 3-day conference, they forgot to book hotel rooms. You forget these things, but this was an example of where planning goes awry. Prioritizing is important. Now, most people prioritize by importance. I have several things to do tonight. What's the most important thing I have to do? You get that done first. What's next most important? You do that. You go down that list. People with ADHD prioritize by interest. What's the most interesting thing I have to do? Let me get that done first. And when I'm done watching this movie, the next most interesting thing is going to be checking my Facebook, my email. Homework and chores never come to the top of that second list. Activating to task is important. This is getting started at things. I have this major project at work to get done. It's due on Friday morning. It's Wednesday now. How am I going to get this all done? It's going to take forever. I better get started this right away. It's so important. I'm going to get it going right now, tomorrow. It's that tendency to overwhelm and procrastination. Finishing tasks is a problem. You'll start something, you'll be working on it for a couple of hours, and I'm getting a little tired of this. There's not too much done, just a few finishing steps and cleaning up, but I'm getting bored with it now. I'll put it aside, I'll finish it tomorrow. Tomorrow never comes. You have a closet full of almost finished projects. Emotional modulation is an executive function. If you don't have ADHD, you certainly have emotions. If you do have ADHD, you also have emotions. Everybody has emotions. The difference is in how we modulate them, how we connect them to the inciting event so that the emotion is appropriate to the circumstance. And some people with ADHD have real difficulty with this. Again, let me give you a classic story. It's the holiday season, you've gone to the mall with a friend, you're walking down the mall, you're looking at shop windows, you're having a conversation. If somebody walking the other way unexpectedly bumps shoulders with you, what is the very first thing that happens? The first thing. When I ask this question in live conferences, people will respond. The first thing that happens is, excuse me, something along that line. That's not the first thing. The first thing is something along the line of, son of a bitch, I'll kill you. Because what has really been stimulated by that situation is your autonomic nervous system, that jungle emotion, that jungle nervous system of, I've just been attacked, I have to either fight to the death or run away to survive. That's the choice I have. Very quickly you notice, well, the mall is crowded, I see a lot of people are jostling each other, and I wasn't really paying attention to where I was walking. And by the time you finish turning around, you are apologizing to him, he's apologizing to you. It's my fault, no, it's my fault. You walk off, 2 minutes later, it's done, gone, and forgotten. If you can modulate your emotion. But if you're unable to modulate your emotion, and in that time that you're turning around, you are maintaining that high state of agitation and threat, suddenly you're nose to nose, usually with somebody bigger than you are in the middle of the mall, not an optimal place to be. So again, that process of being able to modulate your emotion is very important. Many of the situations that we hear about difficulty with anger management may reflect this issue as well. Working memory is a very important executive function. Working memory is how big a mental screen we can maintain as we're working on the data on that screen. And it's very important, especially for any kind of learning. Think about reading. If you're going to read a book, a novel, you read the first page, you take the relevant information on that and integrate that with what you're reading on the second page. Take that information and integrate that with what you're seeing on the third page, and you go through the book that way. And in doing so, you have a sense of character development, you have a sense of the themes that are developing, the plot, you have a good idea of what this book is all about. But if you don't have a good working memory, if you have a very weak working memory, you're going to read the first page, forget about it, read the second page, forget about it, read the third page, forget about it, and now your 270-page novel turns out to be just that many one-page short stories, and you have no idea what this book is really about. That's certainly an important factor in ADHD. And many of the kids that we see with ADHD have difficulties with reading comprehension, not because they don't understand, but because they don't have that working memory. And finally, there's the issue of metacognition. And metacognition is best defined as thinking about one's own thinking. It refers to the processes involved in planning, in monitoring, and understanding one's own performance. And all of these issues are impacted in adults with ADHD. So what we knew at this point, and this is the early 2000s, is executive function begins to develop in childhood. We knew that. It begins to develop rapidly in late childhood and continues to develop until full adult development occurs, usually in early adult life in your early 20s. And we've known for some time that executive function is controlled basically in the right prefrontal cortex, as part of the brain. And now it was also clear that people with ADHD tend to have relatively weak executive function.